Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of my lecture. On today's episode, we will be talking about admissions which are made in a representative capacity. Admissions which are made in a representative capacity. In my last class, I discussed admissions by a counsel binding on the clients. Now, this class, we'll be talking about admission made in representative capacity. Now, to go straight to my notes, admissions made by a person in a representative capacity is binding on all persons represented by such person, provided that two things. Number one, the person making the admission is sued in a representative capacity, and then number two, he or she must have made the admission in his representative capacity as opposed to making the admission in his private capacity. As we can see in the case of Idesoh versus Ordia and the case of AKINIWO versus NSIRIM. Now, what basically are we talking about here? We are saying that when a person has been sued in a representative capacity, any admission made while that person is talking in his representative capacity, such admission would be admissible validly. Now, what we are saying is this. In my last series of classes, I've given you a series of examples. Let me paint the example again. Now, I was talking about a particular community in Delta State. Let us use Odili as an example. Shell compression, which is known to dig oil out of the floor for refinery and all that, decided to go to that particular part of Delta State, dug fuel out of the floor and all that through their pipes. But while they were transporting the fuel through their pipes, one of the fuel got burst and then it spilled on people's farms, and that caused a problem, a very catastrophic problem for the community, because the community would not be able to access their means of livelihood, which usually would have been farming. Neither would they be able to access their second means of livelihood, which ordinarily would have been fishing. Now, that's because the fuel poured both on the floor, that is on normal ground, and in the water. That's the crude oil that was taken from the ground. One particular person, let us say the head of the community, decided to sue Shell for damages. He wants Shell to pay the people damages for destroying their means of livelihood, for keeping them in danger of a lot of factors, because fuel could be chemically dangerous. That's the crude oil could be chemically dangerous and all that. And then when they got to court, any admission made by that person, let us hypothetically speak that the person is Chief Emmanuel Lucky. That is Chief Emmanuel Lucky and the people of Odili versus Shell Company. Any admission made by Emmanuel Lucky in courts, that admission, if it was done in a representative capacity, as we can see that he was representing the whole people of Odili in court, if that admission was made in his representative capacity while he was representing those people and not in his personal capacity, it is possible, even while representing certain people, that you would make a particular admission in your own personal capacity and not in a representative capacity. When the court is going to deem admissible this kind of evidence, this particular one of admission made in a representative capacity, there are two things that the court would have to look at, like I've illustrated earlier. The first thing is that the person must be suing or must have been sued in a representative capacity. And then the second thing is that the person must have made certain statements or done certain conduct in a representative capacity and not in his personal capacity. And that is what I've been able to illustrate to you using the case of Lucky Dube versus Shell, which is very hypothetical. Don't go and quote it in your exam. It is a very hypothetical fact. Now, let's continue with my notes. In the case of Ajuwa versus Odili, where I wrote authority, it says that this is the authority for the principle that in a representative action, an admission made by a party to the previous proceeding is binding on the family and the community or class of persons being represented in the proceedings. Now, what does this mean? We know that we've already established that when someone sues in a representative capacity, and not just that, he makes an admission in such a capacity, then that admission would be admissible. Now, this one is telling us that where there has been a previous proceeding, now in a previous proceeding, somebody made an admission while he was being sued in a representative capacity. For example, in this case of the people of Odili versus Shell, the person who sued in a representative capacity is Emmanuel Lucky, Chief Emmanuel Lucky. Now, Chief Emmanuel Lucky made a very serious mistake while he was on the stand giving evidence. Guess what Chief Emmanuel Lucky said? Chief Emmanuel Lucky stated in evidence that one of the children in the community mistakenly burst the pipe by carrying cutlass when he was farming one day and mistakenly hit it, which must have caused the pipe to spill fuel. Now, if you look at that, that is a very serious admission, because the crux of the case is that negligence was in the part of Shell with the way they carried their whole operations. But now, Chief Emmanuel Lucky has come to say that somebody actually cut that particular pipeline. Now the question is, because of that fatal mistake, the court then said there is no wrongdoing on the part of Shell, and in the absence of any wrongdoing, the case is therefore dismissed. The people in the class, that's the whole people of Odili, now became very angry and then wanted to institute another proceeding. Now, the person that wants to institute another proceeding is doing it in his personal capacity, not in a representative capacity. So we have one tiny farmer, let us say Mr. Shofolarin, one Yoruba man, is not even a Delta person, that was living in the community, and because of the oil spill, it affected his own farm. He's going to court independently to go and sue Shell. Now, Shell now brought a previous proceeding, that is the people of Odili versus Shell, and said that because of the admission that has been made by Mr. Emmanuel Lucky in that previous proceeding, that admission is therefore binding because Mr. Shofolari was a party to that suit. That means he was part of the class of persons that was represented in that previous suit. Since we can say that he was part of the class of persons in the previous suit, any admissions that has been made by Mr. Emmanuel Lucky is therefore binding in this new proceeding. Do you understand that? So let us read that Ajuwa's authority again. In the case of Ajuwa versus Odili, it is the authority for the principle that in a representative action, an admission made by a party in the previous proceeding, can you see that? That is in the case of Odili versus Shell. An admission made by a party in the previous proceeding is binding on the family or in the community or in the class of persons being represented in this new proceeding. Do you understand that? So you have to be careful when you're talking about representative actions. You have to be careful because any admission made in a representative action would be used against each and every one of those parties if they decide to reinstitute another representative action or have a personal action based on the substance of that first case. Do you understand that? Now we then go further. An admission made by a head of the family who is sued in such capacity is binding on all members of the family. This is another example. You know that I told you that when you are talking about representative capacity, it need not only be family. If you look at the case of Ajuwa versus Odili, it tells us that it could be family, it could be community, and it could be class of persons. So we can be working in a particular organization, and then a particular sect in that organization, let us say the cleaners in the organization, they came together and said, okay, we don't like the way they are unfairly treating us in this organization, let us go to court. That's a class of persons. Any admission made in that court, each of those cleaners in that organization will not be able to institute an action if that particular admission is fatal to their case. Do you understand that? We then go back to the authority of OJEIGBE versus AMAKIRI that says that an admission made by a head of the family who is sued in such capacity is binding on all the members of that particular family. So make sure that you remember that particular authority. Now, admissions made by predecessors in title are binding on successors in title. That is the case of OJEIGBE versus OKWARANYIA, section 21 subsection 3A of Evidence Act. And what does it tell us? It says statements made by persons who have any proprietary or pecuniary interest in the subject matter of the proceeding and who made the statement in their character of person interested, or from whom the parties to the suit have derived their interest in the subject matter of the suit, are admissions if they are made during the continuance of the interest of the person making the statement. This is what we are saying. We are saying that somebody has bought land in 1975 and in 2005 the person sold the land to B. So A bought land in 1975. In 2005 A sold the land to B. Any admission that A made on that land throughout the time he held it is binding on B. Simple. That's what it just means. Do you understand that? Any admission made by A, that is a predecessor in title, in any interest in relation to the land, so far B is continuing the interest of A, any admission made by A is therefore binding on B. And what is our authority for that? The case of OJEIGBE versus OKWARANYIA and section 21 subsection 3 of the Evidence Act. And with that, I end my lecture today on admissions made in a representative capacity. I hope that you enjoyed the lecture, and I hope that you totally understand when we discuss admissions made in representative capacity. In my next class, I will be discussing admissions made by person expressly referred to by a party to suit. And with that, I will see you in my next class.